Hi everyone, this is Alan McKay. Welcome to episode 123. I'm speaking with Tomasz Wyszolmirski. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Alan McKay Podcast. Alan is an Emmy Award-winning visual effects artist and mentor to many leading industry experts. Listen in as Alan talks with other industry leaders in film, video games, and visual effects about their experience, lessons, and methodology. Alan will teach you pivotal advice to fast-track your career, better your skills, and reach your ultimate dream job. Check out the latest episodes on alanmckay.com.
Hi everyone. Welcome to episode 123. I'm speaking with Tomasz Wyszolmirski about his studio Dabarti in Poland. So this episode is going to be really fun. We get into a lot of really cool stuff. Basically, Tomasz came from Evermotion back in the day, and obviously everyone knows who Evermotion is. Does a lot of really amazing architectural renderings and sells those stock models as well as stock scenes, as well as does a lot of other really cool stuff. Dabarti does the same thing, but more on a macro level, doing more custom animation and a lot of really various different things like that. It's really cool talking to Tomasz just more about his background as well as starting out and kind of learning to build his business and identify the needs of certain industries as they grow. So we get into a lot of different stuff, and it's definitely, as I always feel it is when you're speaking to owners of companies, really interesting just to kind of see the evolution as well as being able to, like I said, pick up on certain needs as you go along. So I think there's a lot that we can gain from this episode, hearing about his evolution, growing up into the business that he is today and all the things that they do, as well as just sharing a lot of really great insights I think a lot of us can benefit from. So that being said, I'm going to make this introduction kind of short. I wanted to get right into the nuts and bolts of this episode. We have a boot camp coming up pretty soon, so we're going to still start to move to doing 3 episodes a week shortly. We're working on a few new things at the moment. One thing I'm really proud of that if you want to check it out is the Productive Artist, and this is a book specifically built on the premise of being productive, how to get your time back. So if you're interested in learning to be more productive and create more time for yourself, really learn to think smart rather than working hard, work smarter and more efficiently with what you do, which I know all of us at our essence wish that we could do a lot more of. I've put together a book which you'll be able to check out and gain access to. So if you want to check that out now, simply go to alanmckay.com/productiveartist and you'll be able to download the free book there. So simply go to the link there. I'll leave a link to it in the show notes as well. But this is really cool. It's about 50 pages and it's jam-packed with actionable methods, techniques, things that you can do as a visual effects artist, as a designer, as a game developer. This was specifically written for us, rather than it being something that was written more for the general corporate workforce. I wanted this to be something that we can learn to think more efficiently, whether it is just a matter of learning to batch our tasks as artists, learning to really think more intelligently about how we're working, and just because people around us are sitting around playing video games or chatting to each other, it doesn't mean that we can't be learning a new skill. We can't be taking care and front loading a lot of the tasks and responsibilities that we need, or planning what we need to get done the next day before we leave, so that way we can roll into work and be completely efficient and productive, hit the ground running, rather than needing that ramp up of going to your desk and getting a coffee and sitting down and trying to remember where you're at and checking your renders. Learn to automate everything. There's so much that we go through. There's a lot of really great advice. A lot of it is pulled from the podcast and from various talks that I've done at events all around the world, and compiled into a actionable and ready to go guide that you'll be able to use right now. So if you want to check that out, go to alanmckay.com/productiveartist, and I'll leave a link to that in the show notes as well. So if you want to check out the show notes, simply go to alanmckay.com/123. I think that should be pretty easy to remember. So that's episode 123. And you'll be able to check out all of the show notes, all the key quotes and references and everything else from this episode. Okay, so I will leave it there. Let's dive into this episode with Tomasz. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself and what you do?
Yes, my name is Tomasz Wyszolmirski. I'm the founder of Polish studio Dabarti. I'm basically doing everything in the studio from coding to managing it. Our main our main domain is microstock production in the essence, and we create many very short animations, and then we sell them through various outlets. And it's quite relaxed work. I would say it's not some heavy demanding client.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, some client breathing down your neck and telling you that it needs to be done yesterday.
So it's very chill out work, I would say. And we are living in quite isolated place from all the VFX world, and east of Poland, small city, which is great for living, but it's cool to catch up with some other artists from time to time, like yourself at the moment.
Absolutely. Actually, do you know Simon Masaik?
No, I don't think so.
I was just curious because I noticed you did some work for Evermotion, and he's also from Poland and good friends with the guy who runs it.
Can you tell the name once again? Maybe
I'm probably I'm Australian, so I'm probly completely butchering it. It's either Simon or Zeman, SZYMON, and then last name Masiak, Masiak.
I don't think so. I don't think I know him.
Okay, no, I was just curious because we've known of each other for 1,000 years, but we met once, like went to like a cheap Mexican place in LA just to kind of catch up once when he was passing through. But yeah, he does a lot of stock stuff too. But I think he's best friends with.
I know him. Yeah, I know of him. Like I didn't
What's
meet
his
him
website?
personally.
I had it up again.
It's
Motion VFX or something. Yeah, Motion
something
VFX.
like this.
Yeah,
and I've seen his stock videos and stock animations basically early on. It was very inspiring for me, and because his background was like crazy VFX works, and he had huge talent. He has huge talent still, but after some years, he moved back to Poland and started this company doing stock animations, which was inspiring for me. Like this is another way to do it. Like you don't have to be going only for the VFX high.
That's right.
High big names productions. You can just do something on the side and be successful.
Yeah.
And I think he is quite successful because his studio is growing and the quality is very good from what I have seen.
Mm-hmm. No, it's really cool, and like, yeah, it's kind of crazy that your region seems to be very focused on, like, there's a bunch of you are all doing like really great stock stuff, and but yeah, Simon, he used to work at Cafe FX and a few other places, like doing feature film stuff back in the day. But yeah, I was just curious, really. But I think it's really awesome. I mean, it's pretty inspiring to see others as artists, especially going and doing these business endeavors, because I feel like a lot of us as artists, we kind of embrace the we're artists, we don't want to run a business that's for business people, and we have to be the starving artist and all the other mentalities that come with it. And when really I think that especially now, as you said, even as like a side thing, I think it's important that we all kind of find what we're passionate about and see whether we can do it, whether it's a short film, whether it's a book, whether it's doing a side business, or whether it's a full-time creating your own business. So
it's very tricky to balance it out. I would say that many of those side business, they just like side projects don't usually come with any financial safety.
Yeah, exactly.
And when I started doing stock production, I was actually freelancing for different companies, and at the time I had quite a lot of free time because the projects were not steady. I had like 3 or 4 weeks, once 2 months on site work. It was great pay. I could work on some cool projects, but after I was back in Poland, I was stuck with this huge amount of free time that I didn't know what to do with. So I started experimenting with stock production.
That's cool.
And it actually, I didn't expect much from it, but when I started, it was like 8 years ago, when the market was very, it was very easy
young.
to sell videos because it was not very heavily saturated at this point. And I have seen artists selling spinning earth globe like 1,000 times, which was insane amount of money for this. Like you can create this in like one day, and they were making like $20-$30 per video.
Yeah.
So it was very inspiring at the start. It's impossible to achieve this level anymore, but with the high quality of content, there's still a lot of niche videos that you can create.
Actually, I want to kind of backtrack in a second to kind of back to you being an artist and how you started out. But like, I was kind of curious, like, do you find that as a good way to kind of validate ideas that you want to do, is like looking at like how much something similar to maybe what you want to do is sold? Because I mean, that's like a really great amount of analytics you have there of other content, whether it's stock or other things similar to that, even going on Envato and websites like that.
I would say it's not the best way. Like you can judge what kind of subjects are more popular, but if you attempt to recreate or create very similar videos to whatever is already on the market, you're a bit too late, because those videos there are very, very well promoted by the search engine,
right?
Because of the huge number of sales. So if you tackle this very saturated but well-selling subjects, it is very, very tricky. I tried not to do that. When we create a new subject, we just or new videos, we come up with subject and then try to think about a nice video to have, like without actually seeing what's selling at the time.
Right.
Because over time, I found that we come up with the videos, very unique videos that sell better than those available. So like you need to be creative and come up with something unique in order to break through the like few thousand other videos.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, if there's something that has been around and through SEO it has become quite,
it's very tricky.
Yeah. But I mean, I think for me, like I always look at visual effects, and I think like, if I always look at when people are looking for work, sometimes all it takes is like one shot on their reel and they'll get the work, because coincidentally they're doing a lot of that at the studio. Like I remember we hired an artist once, and I was asking like, why did we hire her? Because I wasn't there for the hiring part, and the VFX supervisor was like, well, she had dust on her reel and we needed dust. But that sometimes is the hiring process. And I look at visual effects and I feel like if you have a plane crash on your reel, then you're never going to be short of work, because everywhere I go, everyone's doing plane crashes. And I always look at that as like, there's certain things that are very, like let's say in 1999, if you do matrix bullet ripples, then that was your way in. But, so again, like looking at what clients are typically, like what their needs are, it's also good just to kind of, looking at Andrew Kramer's Shockwave is a good example where you see that stuff everywhere, all the shockwave effects, because again, it's just one of those elements that can be used for so many different things.
The good source of inspiration for me is actually watching new productions, like new discovery documentaries, and just taking a look at what kind of footage they use. It gives good perspective on what the market needs as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember I was directing a game cinematic or commercial in New York years ago, and we needed like a drop of blood into a pool of blood or whatever, and I figured, okay, we'll just get some stock footage of like a droplet, and we'll just grade it to be more blood-like. And the only thing really around this was like 2005, something like that, and the only thing around that we could really find was on Artbeats, and I forget what it cost, but it was like I was blown away by how much Artbeats were charging for their content, just because there weren't other people around really. They could charge what they wanted, and I was like, we could pay for an artist for 3 days of work, even though it would take maybe a day to do, for the equivalent, and we'd be able to get the angle we want rather than buying footage, So it kind of blows my mind, like especially back then when there was a limited amount of content out there, you could really have a lot more control over, pricing and things like that. Whereas I'm sure now, it's a bit more competitive than it used to be.
Yeah, it is. And I think everything changed once iStock Photo came with this microstock business. They started charging like tenth of what
Wow.
competition did.
Yeah, that's gonna hurt a lot of people's businesses. But that's cool. So, like, for you, how did you start out? I mean, as an artist, I love talking about this stuff because I feel like I could ask that same question over and over, and everyone has a completely different story. So, for you, like, when did you get first into art, and like, when did you really find your passion for doing it?
It was in high school, and I was fascinated by a Polish artist, Tomasz Wyszolmirski, and he created this Oscar-nominated animation, basically fully by himself.
How do you spell his last name?
Baginski. He created a cathedral animation. You probably have seen it.
Fuck, that was amazing.
It was amazing, and it was inspiring that like one artist with the help of production studio could direct and create this animation. And he's from the same city as I am, and this was another proof to me that even though we are from small Polish city, we can create something amazing, and it can be somehow awarded or mentioned in outside of the Poland. And I started creating some basic 3D models back then, like learning how to model, how to render, because it was fascinating to me how you can create your micro world inside computer, and then you can do basically anything with it. You can light it in some unique ways and change whatever you want in 3D. So I started doing a lot of that in high school. I didn't learn in any other way than like 3ds Max help. There was not many video tutorials. It basically didn't exist back then. And
what year was that, by the way?
It was, I think, 2004.
Okay.
It was 2004, and oh no, it was actually 2002. Time flies very fast. And after a couple of years doing this, before actually finishing high school, I got contacted by Evermotion and asked if I would like to join their team. So straight after high school, I just joined Evermotion and started doing some 3D models and interiors. It was probably very, very good for me at the time, because it was like early days of VA, and it was very nice way to work with 3D scenes. All this.
Sorry to cut you off. I was just curious, like, how big is their teams typically, at least back then, for doing all the stuff they do?
Back then, it was like me and 3 bosses.
It's like, I am Evermotion. Yeah.
they didn't have an office when they hired me yet, so I was very early on. Then they started hiring more people and basically established the Evermotion like properly.
Wow.
And before that, it was like few guys working from their apartments.
Yeah, because it's pretty impressive, like the amount of stuff I can never keep up with, like how much they put out. Like, what kind of size are they these days, roughly?
I visited them last month, and I think it's like 30 people or 25. It's not a huge studio, but they're quite effective.
Yeah, that's cool. And for you, like, what were some of the big challenges that you found, like going from school, going into 3D, and then let's say Evermotion?
It was quite easy transition because it was basically just modeling. It was not huge change from what I used to do. And probably the biggest challenge was shading and creating photorealistic effects. And it was very fascinating how to build a proper shading in VA. And it looked totally different back then than it is now. Yeah. So I spent hours and hours playing with all the settings, trying to learn what's doing what. And this was challenging, very challenging, because now we can use very simplified methods for GI.
Yeah.
But back then, figuring out perfect settings for photon mapping and readance map, it was very tricky.
Yeah, and you can be a lot more sloppy now and still get relatively good render times compared to before, where it's like everything matters.
I feel like these days it's totally easy. Like anyone can just use default settings and just focus on the creation, which is good for people that's at the starting now.
Yeah.
Especially with GPU rendering, it's insane.
Yeah, I definitely want to pick your brain about that later on because, again, like I feel like for the longest time it's been, it's definitely the future, and it's getting to a point now where it's, you look at Clarice and you look at a lot of other tools. V-Ray 3.6 has got so many great additions. It just makes, things almost real time,
Yeah.
And I'm really blown away by that because it used to be you would hit render and you'd walk away, and now it's like there's no walking away. So
You don't have time.
Yeah, it's like luckily with effects I can hit simulate still. That's about my only excuse. But that's really cool. So like, did you think that Evermotion had a bit of an impact on you even then for, down the line, like getting more of used to the idea of creating, a lot of support for other companies and creating assets?
Mostly it was very helpful for me to understand that I can actually make a living on this. Like I can do this professionally and support myself. And it was quite hard to understand that, especially for my parents at first. Like making money with computer, like 3D models, it was insane idea to everyone around. But companies like Evermotion proven that it is doable, and especially in this same city, because they are based in my hometown, so it was easy.
That's cool. That's really cool. And I guess for you, like with Dabarti, like how long between leaving, like when did you start your company compared to like, did you work in many other studios after Evermotion as you kind of transitioned out?
I worked at Evermotion for like 2 years, and then I moved to Ireland because I decided to learn a little bit more how different studios work. And at first I did architecture in a small company in Cork, and after like 6 months I moved to Dublin, where I worked in animation company. They're quite big studio now, called Brownback Films. They are focused on animation for kids and some TV series like Noddy. And I worked there for 1 year, and after that I moved back to Poland and started freelancing. Cool. And this like transition from full-time work to Dabarti took 2.5 years, I would say. It was a moment where I experimented with stock animations. I experimented with some different way of getting work. I didn't want to work full-time at the time because I really like this freedom of freelancer. But with that freedom, it was very tricky also to make a living if you want to just pick the best projects.
What do you think are some of the biggest challenges as a freelancer?
I think constantly like looking for work, like to keep your schedule full all the time. At least it was hard for me. Like I had some projects that would overlap, so I couldn't take them. And I couldn't ask clients to just move the project like 3 weeks later because I am on a site at a different project. So because of those overlaps, I had to turn down projects and had quite a lot of break between those.
Right. And for you, when you started your company, like when do you remember when you had the idea, I guess, to start it? Like, was it you're still in Ireland getting drunk with everyone and you're like, that's it, I got it, I'm going to start my own business. But like, did the idea come kind of organically, or was it
I think
gradually?
It was organic, I would say, because if you're living in Poland and you want to do freelance work, you have to start your own company anyway. So just for tax purpose, you need to be self-employed, basically. And so I decided that if I'm going to create a company, I will create some name for it. And that became Dabarti, which means nothing, basically. It just I came up with the word because I was looking for a name that it will be easy to register a domain for. So it was not used by anything else, and that helped.
I think that's the critical validation these days for a lot of people is like, I'm going to come up with a business name. And it's like, what's the meaning behind it? It's like, I don't know. I got the domain, so that's all I care about.
I didn't care about meaning because I decided that if Dabarti will be good at any point, it will have meaning by itself. Like it will mean something. So the name doesn't have to be anything.
That's like one of the most critical business tools that people need to really realize is that, spending, like, the number one thing people do when they first decide they're going to start their own company is they go and spend a fortune on business cards. They go and do like all these ridiculous things. I got to get the best website. And at the end of the day, the best name for the company, all this stuff, like your name, your logo, none of that stuff, really is relevant. It's more about, get a website up, but it could be one page. It just needs to have your email address and what you do. And it's more about establishing yourself, and then over time, getting the work, and your name, all that stuff doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, it's what people associate with you. And again, like having a unique name, no one is ever going to get that confused with anything else. It's not like I think of Linkin Park. I read an interview with Mike Shinoda, who's one of the members of the band, and I remember the way that they had Linkin, Linkin. The reason they spelled that way is because there was a domain available for Linkin Park rather than having the typical Linkin spelling. And, even for music bands, everything else, like you got to think ahead and see, all right, what's something that people can remember, easy to access, and the relevance of it doesn't really matter. It's more about, can they associate that with you? And if you have something that's too generic, like Digital Pixel Studio or whatever, that sort of thing is going to get lost very easily and confused with everything else out there. So I think that's great. I mean, you've established something that makes you unique, and Dabarti is you, and you mean Dabarti, rather than it needing to be something completely different, like Pixel Domain, or again, there's so many generic names that you'll see.
There's a lot of companies called Pixel something, and it's confusing.
I worked for Digital Dimension back in the day, and they did like great work back in the day, at least. And I remember we had this discussion because we were Digital Dimension. We're doing all these big movies. And the owner at the time, he was like, we're at DD. And we would all say like, no, Digital Domain is DD. And he'd be like, no, they're D2. And it's just like, you got to change the name. But you got to be unique in that way. People associate that with you. And it's the same thing. You need something that's easy to spell. Like I had Catastrophic, and I never thought Catastrophic would be like people had an issue with that, but people had a hard time even saying that name. Like I would go into many meetings, they're like, oh yeah, you run Catastrophic. That's, I love that place. So I never thought of that. I just thought Catastrophic Effects, CFX, that will eventually be the abbreviation. But like I don't think that the name.
I hope that Dabarti is easy to spell for everyone.
Well, I remember my team and I were having the discussion like, oh yeah, like it'd be really cool to approach you and get you on the podcast. And for us, like it's an easy to remember name, and it also kind of sticks with you. It's like go into Dabarti, like the party. It's kind of like you can do a lot of wordplay with it. But I mean, it stands out, and that's like, what you want.
If I would use my last name for marketing, it would be just terrible. Yeah, it's just so hard to pronounce.
I mean, again, like any Polish name is going to be a bit tricky. But I mean, still, like even with names, you're right, because like I'm Alan McKay, and there's about 3 different ways to spell my first and last name, and same thing, Tomasz. It's one of those names that depending on what region you're from, you're gonna probably think of it in very different forms. So, but your last name, there might be a few typos here and there. You might need to buy a few domains that redirect to yours.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
But again, for me, like I'm always interested when artists do go and create businesses, because I feel like a lot of us are allergic to it, or we all think that we're not going to succeed, we're going to fail, and all these different things. Like, did you ever have any concerns going into it? Not necessarily from your parents, but directly from you about whether trying this out would be a good idea?
I had to take some time to think about it before actually doing it properly. I took some breaks from 3D just to travel a little bit and think about it in a relaxed way, like not under pressure. And I decided that there might be some issues, like I didn't know anything about managing company or any kind of taxes or whatever. But I figured that I will find people to help me with this, or I could learn about it, especially in this age where you can find anything online. You can learn about it very quickly if you need something. And after that decision, probably the next hardest was hiring first person, because when you hire, I feel that when you hire someone, you just take responsibility for
as fuck.
That person. Like you need to be sure that you can pay that person each month, that you can support every need, you have place for that person to work for. And
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's also it also motivates you to do everything correctly. Like when I was alone, like I sometimes slept till 1 p.m. or whatever. I stayed all night and just didn't care about some days. But when you have people working for you, you want to keep them in the loop, like to make sure that they are up to date with everything.
Yeah, you've got to be accountable.
Yes.
And what was the first, like, the role of the first person you hired? Like, because so for day one, you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to start a company. And, did you hire an artist? Who was
It
the type
was
of person?
artist 3D modeling person. Like the first person I hired was accountant, but after that it was a 3D artist, and he still is with us after 5 years now.
Great.
And he's doing very good.
Cool. And I guess for you, like, what were some of the, if you can remember this far back, like, what were some of the biggest, like, lessons you had kind of learning to run a company and doing all that from scratch?
It's hard to think about anything major. Like things were changing very fast. Like you have to adapt each month to changing conditions. And I think that this was probably very important to constantly like adjust your workflow and adjust the company to fit better people that are in it. And it was tricky part. We are still working on improving things to make it run smoother. But I would say that most important was constantly developing better ways of working.
Cool. I like that.
And this ultimately like resulted in us using GPU rendering, which helped us heavily.
Yeah, I bet.
And after that, because we started producing a lot of videos, because it rendered fast, we had to develop better pipeline. So I started using Deadline instead of Backburner, which is totally.
I gotta say, like Backburner, it's definitely gotten better over the years, but it's still, I mean, it's one of those things that
it does not change.
Well, that's just it. Like you'll get like some TCP/IP error or something like, there was one of my students posted the other day. It was like the pipe has ended or something, and people were like, "What does that mean?" And it's just like, I don't know. Like it turns out, I think it's like a TCP/IP configuration setting, like in your network settings or something ridiculous. But Backburner is like one of the few things I've ever used where everything should be working and it still isn't. You know what I mean? It's just like it should be working and the exact same setup is on every other machine. Yeah. And they're all fine. Yet this computer keeps erroring out or whatever. A Deadline I love. Like it's just making life so much easier.
Like with Backburner, I pushed it a lot. Like I wrote some custom tools to process the jobs, like uploading it to email or whatever. But there is just so much you can do with it. It does not support Python. It's just very tricky to write anything more complex. And when I reported some bugs, they were never fixed. Like I'm not sure if you are aware about Backburner, but there is a built-in server function. Like you can start Backburner server, like web server, what I mean. And you can log into Backburner through the browser. And through the browser, you can have multiple users accessing jobs, which is not possible with typical Backburner. But there is just one bug. There's one bug, and it's there's wrong encoding on every single text you see there. So all the jobs there have wrong names. You don't see what's the name of the job and what's the name of the artist. And this was the only issue with that web server that was never fixed up to this day. So I gave up on it and moved to Deadline, which was very refreshing experience. And because we moved to Deadline, I also started using Shotgun to easier like see what's going on and see all the previews generated basically from any place.
That's really cool. I mean, I've done a lot of scripting with Backburner, and I'm impressed that you can use it for completely different things. And it's great in that way. But it's so much more work, and there are so many limitations. And Deadline is kind of like I used to work for Frantic, who developed it. I'm good friends with Chris Bond, who is the owner of ThinkBox. And I mean, it's been one of those tools that for us, like we developed it for production, like for our productions. It wasn't like, hey, let's go make a tool. And I think that is the big difference, because like if you look at Backburner's history, up until 2005, it literally was one developer and two computers. So he would be submitting a job on one and picking it up on the other, and that was the full development. But yet, like, we would be using it with 50, 60 artists, and I'm sure that's pretty modest compared to some studios. And I remember, like, I think it was max 4. We figured it out. There was about 30 jobs could be in the queue before it would crash. So, like, you know, it would get to a point where if too many jobs were queuing up being submitted, we would have to run to the server room and start deleting jobs before it crashed and we lost everything. And and the fact that only one person could have a permission at one time to edit anything, like all that stuff. So you know, it was good back in the day, but I'm kind of surprised it's still the go-to software for all of Autodesk stuff. But that's really cool. I mean, you know, I think that the big advantage when you get into Deadline for custom coding, like for more custom developing, is the fact that you can use it for anything you need. That's just it. You can have it render something out and then instantly go and composite it all, and then when it gets that back, it can upload it and email you. And I mean, like custom tag everything. You can do so much with it. And yeah, again, like adding it to Shotgun as well just gives it even more legs. So I think that it's so powerful in that way.
Just many people complain about it being too expensive for some reason, but I don't agree with that, since it saves so much time in our daily work that it's actually cheaper to use it than not.
Yeah, I think that the people who might complain are more maybe individuals, but like as soon as you have artists that are all, you know, you've got to, you know, pay for them. You know, artist time is so much cheaper, so much more expensive than software. Yeah, so that's cool. And like, so I guess for you, I mean, what type of stuff I guess like one of the big differences between what you produce now compared to what you were producing at the beginning of Dabarti? Like what type of elements and assets do you put out?
Initially, those were very simple scenes, and I had my like internal rule that each video has to take like 2 hours of my time at tops, with preparing the scene, animation, and compositing. Wow. So because I didn't want to spend too much time on it, because I decided that like if I spend 2 days per video, it may never return on the investment.
Yep.
So to validate if I can make money on this, I was creating those videos very fast. And this helped me also get better, because I was trying to create better videos in shorter amount of time, like constantly pushing myself. And these days, on the other hand, we try to push the quality a bit further. Our videos take much longer. They are more complex, but because we save some money on rendering, which on GPU is much cheaper, we can somehow justify doing better models, better shaders on the scenes.
That's cool. I think it was episode 29. Like I was speaking with Andrew Kramer from Video Copilot, and that was something that we talked about a lot with tutorials. Is kind of like, you know, I think that in the beginning I was the same way. I wanted to speed up development as much as I could, and so for me, I used to write a lot of articles, but I found that by putting out a lot of video training, it was so much quicker because I could hit record and I could just do it rather than having to write and format everything and do all this stuff. But you know, bit by bit, it was more about, you know, I can't afford to spend a week making a free tutorial, or even like if it was a product, it would still need to be a few weeks or whatever, because the ROI, like the return on investment, wouldn't be the same. But I think the big epiphany for me was when I started changing that, where instead I didn't want to put anything out unless it was the absolute best it could be. And there's so many times where I've spent weeks on something and completely scrapped and started again because it wasn't good enough. And I think for me, like, that changed everything, because suddenly by putting in the time and making sure it is the absolute highest quality it can be, suddenly that stuff is able to live a lot longer. You're not scrapping things a year later or weeks later just because it isn't quite the same quality. And people can tell the difference in quality as well. And that's something we discussed a lot, was like, you know, putting in the time, because like everyone's putting out tutorials, everyone's putting out you know, stock and other things. But if you put out something that people think of it as like, you know, you go to Dabarti because the quality is amazing and it's exactly what I need out of the box, not you're going to get it and then rework it into something that might maybe help you. That's critical, and that's what makes you, I think, stand out, is like doing the quality and putting the time in.
And these days we try to push it further because market is getting even more competitive. So just we try to stay a little bit ahead. So we now produce 4K footage as well, which was quite heavy to render, but we are managing it, and the models are like much better than they used to be.
That's cool. And what typically, are some of the type of stuff that you would do, and what are the clients typically that would use it? Like, what type of models or stock assets?
Like our best sellers are from technical videos, server rooms, some switches, anything quite generic that can be a background to quite a lot of videos. And the second most popular is probably transportation, different kind of trucks on roads, trains. This is quite generic, and many companies in transportation basically use it for their marketing videos or presentations. But we had also some big names using the animations for commercials, for example. And the one cooler one was HTC Vive. He used it as one of the videos for reveal teaser.
Cool.
And it was awesome, like to see it totally by surprise.
Yeah.
And it's quite often that I see our footage in a random places. Like I watch a documentary on Netflix and see one of our videos. And it's probably if you go ahead and watch any kind of like Discovery Channel or something that has a lot of documentaries in it, it's a huge chance that there would be at least one video from us.
That's great.
In one day.
Yeah, no, that's so cool. Yeah, and again, like I think it's so cool because you're right. Like when you get to see your stuff on screen, or more importantly, when you get to see people using your stuff on screen, because it's always a bit of a surprise how people use it. I think it's so awesome. And like, what are some of the ways that I guess you've been surprised that people have used your stuff? Like, has there been any kind of ways that it wasn't designed to be used, and you're kind of pretty surprised by?
I don't think I was very surprised. There was one terrible movie that I have seen a trailer for. It was like a Polish comedy that probably no one wants to see, but it had our video in a trailer used 4 times. Like they used it very effectively because they showed it at the beginning, in the middle of the trailer, and at the end. And it just showed that the movie had very low budget, to be honest.
That's cool. Yeah, I don't know, like, yeah, again, like, yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's the same way in production too, where let's say you slave over something and put so much work in, and then you have someone compositing it later on that kind of manages to screen all your effects on or do something with it that is just like, what are you doing? Like this isn't meant to be used this way. But that's so cool. And like for you, obviously you've got both a creative and technical background. Like, did you always kind of get a little bit into scripting and coding, or was it something that you just kind of felt necessary to learn along the way?
I did. I was fascinated by coding around the same time as I got fascinated by 3D, and I was actually waiting if I should go to some technical university and learn more about coding, or I should go for 3D. And to be honest, I didn't expect to code that much after I decided to go towards VFX and CGI. But it turned out to be very helpful down the line, because whenever I needed some small tool and some small improvement in our pipeline, I could just write it by myself, especially after I learned Python. Mm-hmm. It was huge help for us internally, because we are a very small team. We're just 5 people, and we are all generalists. So we don't have any dedicated scripter or code writer, and so I'm the one who is doing this.
That's cool. And so you kind of learned on yourself by yourself. Sorry.
Yeah, I used some online game which is called Python Challenge.
Oh, really?
Which is amazing. I would recommend doing this to anyone who is trying to learn coding, because it's a different approach. You have this kind of riddle that you have to solve through writing a code. It's not predefined lesson with some exam at the end. You have just some clues of how you can solve it, but you have to figure out how to write a code yourself using preferably online documentation of Python.
That's cool.
And this kind of this way of learning is also very similar to the way I learned 3D, like looking at the documentation instead of watching tutorials. Mm-hmm. And I find it to be very effective and fast way of learning, because right away you have a problem that you need to solve, and you need to find a solution to that problem. And this is basically how most of the days look like. You have an issue that have not been solved before, and you need to come up with creative solution.
Yeah, no, I think it's so critical. And like, do you think that all artists like should be able to benefit from scripting, like learning to code, and or at least like enough to build basic tools and automate what they do?
Depends if that person is quite technical or just wants to do it, and because it may be very, very tricky to some people to understand the concepts of coding without any prior background.
I think that, I don't know, like for me, I've had mixed approaches to that. I mean, I've always found like if you start to approach things as you would as an artist, I mean, the most simple way to learn would be, turn on, if you're in Maya, like echo all, or if you're in Max, then
Most people listener is good for them.
yeah, exactly. So by enabling that, so you can actually see like, what it's doing. If you make a sphere, if you do anything, I think that the more that as a artist you're able to kind of connect the dots, so you're not jumping into everything all hands on deck. You're more just kind of repeating a line of code, and adding them all, like cutting, copying and pasting and taping it all together. But then after a while, you're like, okay, well, what if I want to change this one value? Or later on, you're like, what if I need to run a loop so I can, do it through multiple objects? And bit by bit, you kind of start to go from doing this very linear approach as you would as an artist to kind of slowly getting a bit more curious. And I think that like, there's so many different approaches depending on what, how your mind works and what you're comfortable with. For some people, you're right. They can just jump in and do it right away. Whereas other people, it's more, they got to kind of break down those walls of thinking that they're not smart enough to do it, or they don't know math, so therefore they can't do it. When really it's more about just kind of finding what way resonates the best with you. Same with how you're saying, reading the manual really works well for you rather than the tutorials. And I agree. I mean, I think it's really great to have that index that you can go to and say, what does this one thing do? And find out, like, rather than, having to fish through, loads and loads of content to hopefully find something. So yeah, but I think it's really cool. And again, I'm just kind of curious, like, what do you think are some of the benefits of coding and scripting and automating things?
Definitely saving a lot of time. I feel that if I need to do something repetitive at least a few times, and I know that I will have to do it in the future, I prefer to spend some time into automating it. And this also, like, not only it helps with saving time, but also helps with not making mistakes.
I was waiting for you to finish to add in that, human error, because it's so critical.
And early on, I started writing some custom submitters, because when we started working as a team, I figured that we had too many mistakes when we added jobs to render farm, and we had small render farm, and I didn't want to waste any time. So there were jobs that were not saved in the correct places, jobs that overwritten older jobs, or typical issue with region rendering. And those all could be easily avoided with the script. So I wrote a small tool that just creates outputs, creates folders for the artists, checks if the settings are correct. Like if there's region rendering, it can switch it off. And those small like tools helped greatly with removing the human error.
Absolutely.
And it speeds out a lot of work, because nobody really likes to spend even a few minutes in like manually writing a place to save the files. Like many studios I have seen, they have some rules for naming files, for saving them. It's a good way to have it, as opposed to not having it at all. But I feel that even better way is to just not ask artists to name anything manually at all. And for that we use shotgun, because if we know that this shot is named like that and it is belonging to this certain subject, we can just create all this folder structure automatically. And basically through the whole pipeline as it is now, artist doesn't have to put any names manually. Everything is predefined and saved for them. This helps greatly with errors.
I think it's so awesome because, that's like one of the number one believers I have is that artists shouldn't really have like a save and load button in terms of the custom, the traditional way, just because, again, going back to human error and all these things, like I think that scripting can save a lot of time. And again, most people think like, oh, well, it's going to save me a few seconds. But when you do that over and over and over,
Yeah.
you're saving hours. And the other big factor is, human error. And like when you're working at 2 a.m. and you've got to go save a file, suddenly it's so easy to accidentally save it in the wrong directory or the wrong file naming, or all these things can go wrong. Or as you said, like submit your render and forget to update the render output, or have like render region and all these other things on. So like I run a mentorship, and like one of the big things we do is we learn to do visual effects, but we also learn to, as artists, learn to code and automate things. And one of the first things that we cover is building a versioning tool that you initially generate your shot directory or project directory, then your shot codes very easily through building these tools. So that way you never need to manually make folders again. But from there, you don't use the save button. You hit a button, it versions up to the next version, but it also updates your render output with the new directory, the new versioning, everything. So you never need to update your render output. You never need to update your file name. And the key thing about all that is that there's other things that are common mistakes. For effects artists using Fume Effects, people tend to have the simulate on the render farm, like back burner mode, turned on by accident. And the worst thing you can do is accidentally submit a render that when it gets picked up, it thinks it's a simulation and starts overriding all your frames. There's just like simple little mistakes that we all make, and you need to kind of protect yourself from. And that's where removing that one step, especially when you're fatigued, stressed, distracted, all those things, you're protecting yourself by customizing these tools to save that.
It's definitely a good approach, and I hope that more people will start coding.
I think it's cool. So for you, I guess, like, what's a typical day for you? Because it sounds like you wear many hats at your company.
In the morning, I usually review all the content from overnight renders and check which shots are ready to composite, which animations are approved, and so on. And after that, I just do some shots myself, how much I can squeeze in a day, and work with artists if they need some help and directions, so we can help with lighting or something. And after I'm finished with like 3D work, usually in the evening I code something for myself or for fun. And so yeah, I split the day in the creative and coding part usually lately, and especially after I released this tool, Dabarti Capture, for acquiring textures, and got quite popular, and now when I have to support it as well, it takes some time, but I'm doing okay, I think.
So what does the tool do?
And it's similar to photogrammetry, but like you can capture surface normal and very high quality depth map of the surface using just one single point of angle, like one view direction, and you light your subject, whatever it is, it can be leaf or some textures, with a flashlight from different directions. And when you feed those photos with different lighting to the software, it can calculate you a normal map, like very nice correct normal map, and depth of the surface that can be later used for displacement or ZBrush sculpting or whatever.
So
and
cool.
I found it like missing. I didn't have this tool available from anywhere online, so decided to write it myself. And what I was always fascinated was doing very high quality leaves for plants. And after trying different techniques like photogrammetry, I just couldn't get this resolution right. Like it didn't hold up in the close-ups. There's always some detail missing. And because in this technique photometric stereo that I'm using, you basically are limited only by resolution of your camera. I was able to get like 8K resolution, high quality normal map of the leaf.
Wow.
You can just zoom in there, and you can see some incredible details that you even don't notice when you look at the surface. This also helped me a little bit lately with understanding how the surfaces look up close, and to build a better shaders as well, because there's so many tiny details that you don't notice.
Yeah, it's really amazing. So you've got two versions. You got the free light version and the pro.
Yeah.
So what would be the difference between upgrading to the pro version?
Resolution. I decided to make light version that you can create up to 1K textures with it. and it's for commercial use, whatever. I'm not limiting it in a way. And Pro version just has unlimited resolution.
That's great. And do you have any tutorials, things like that, to get people up and running pretty quickly with these tools?
There's just one video on Vimeo how to use it. It's command line tool, so there's basically no options. You just feed directory with photos, and it just saves you the output maps. And I created it in this way because it was meant as an internal tool, and we want to process huge amounts of data, like 20, 40 sets a day, for example. And I didn't want to anyone, like artists, having to sit there and dragging directories, picking up everything manually. So I went with this automatic version that just takes it in, calculates everything, and saves you the maps. I found it easier, especially with render farm at the end.
That's great. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to check it out. I'm kind of curious. So yeah, I mean, it looks pretty cool. Yeah, and I guess like I have one or two more questions, but staying on the subject of tools, like what tools do you typically for what you do?
The main application is 3S Max and V-Ray GPU. Those are just 90% of our work. And depending on complexity of compositing, we use either After Effects or Nuke. Most stock videos these days are just After Effects with some small color grading, which is more than enough. And for some complex compositing with many render elements, we use Nuke. We use quite a lot of denoising, especially now with 4K renders.
I bet.
And for that we use Neat Video, which I found, if set up correctly, it can generate very nice detailed image without like blurring the details, which is awesome.
Is that available for most compositing software or just for After Effects?
It is. I think they have OpenFX plugin.
Okay, cool.
So you can use it pretty much everywhere.
Great, cool. And so those are the kind of go-to tools that you use, as well as Dabarti Capture.
Yeah.
Cool. That's great. And have you ever experimented more with other GPU rendering tools, or have you kind of done that with V-Ray?
I tried them, tested them. I wasn't happy with like the first GPU render I used was Octane, and I rendered some videos with it, but there was something missing there. Like probably not because of the engine at the time, but mostly from the GPU side. When I tried it, it was like 4 maybe years ago, when the typical GPUs had like 1 or 2 gigabytes of memory. So I was very limited with the scenes I could create with this.
Cool.
And
go ahead. Sorry.
And after 2 years, basically 2.5 years ago, I got new GPUs from the Maxwell series. Those were, I think, 970 with 4 gigabytes of memory. So I decided to try GPU rendering once again. And I evaluated different options I could have and ended up with V-Ray because it felt most familiar. We used V-Ray in CPU before, so transition was quite easy. There were some things missing at the time in the V-Ray RT, but this is probably the good thing about V-Ray is that when we started, I started sending many reports to Chaos Group about the engine. There was quite a lot of different small bugs that prevented us from generating the animations, but those were very quickly fixed, which I loved, and I was getting like custom builds every day basically. If I had some issue, I had someone there helping us basically daily, and I think that this, over time, this is probably what made me stay with RT, because like 3.1 version of RT that we started using was totally different than 3.6, which just came out, and it feels like completely different engine, and I feel that we have a lot of input in the mother. Like the guys at Chaos Group were implementing everything we asked for. Like I needed some procedural shading. Okay, here's it. Like I wanted faster multi-light rendering, and they came up with adaptive lights, which was insane. And even their CPU rendering now, it all is like response to users and their needs, which is probably the best thing about RT, and it's quite fast because of the GPU rendering.
Yeah, no, I think that they've had so much growth over the years, and because they're so active with really hearing what the industry has and needs, and being able to respond and address all of that, it's pretty mind blowing. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it's definitely an amazing tool, that's for sure. It's definitely my go-to still for a lot of film production. And I guess like one last thing I'm kind of curious about, because I know everyone's going to want to ask you is, especially when it comes to GPU, like what type of hardware are you typically using these days for rendering and typical work?
We have 1070s in our workstations, and in the render farm we have mix of Titan X, 1080 Ti, and some 980 Ti as well. But I think I will replace those older cards that have only 6 gigabytes of memory, because it's getting it's not enough anymore for our scenes.
Yeah. And how much of a difference do you find the 1070s and 1080s?
1070s are, I think it's like 50% slower than 1080 Ti. I don't have 1080 without Ti. It's
yeah,
and especially with this latest 1080 Ti, you have 11 gigabytes of memory.
Yeah, it's huge.
Which is huge, and for the price, I think it's $700 now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess at this point, like, where would people go if they want to find out more about you and about Dabarti, and and also where could they go to find a lot of the stock assets that you guys are developing?
Everything is on dabarti.com website, and if someone wants to learn more about the way we create scenes, we have also a YouTube channel with some video tutorials that you can just see how we work with shaders and setting up the VRT.
That's awesome. Cool. And I just want to thank you again for taking time to do this. I think this has been a lot of fun.
Thank you as well.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that episode. Again, thanks to Tomasz for taking the time to chat and share a lot of his key insights, as well as just all the experience that he's accumulated over his career. So next episode, I'm going to be speaking with Michael Wortman, who is a visual effects supervisor. I think he just wrapped on Black Panther, and we also talk about Atomic Blonde and a lot of other really cool projects. So Michael has a really big background working in Europe and working on a lot of big feature films, coming from more of a technical director background. It's really cool talking to him as his evolution from being artist to VFX soup, and a lot of the advice that he gives along the way. So that episode is coming up next. And after that, there's some other really awesome ones that I really want to announce. We're going to hold off. So I will leave it there for now. Do me a favor, if you have enjoyed this episode and feel like sharing, feel free to spread the word. I would be so grateful if others can gain valuable insight from these episodes. It's definitely a lot of work to put these together, but at the same time, I do it for you because I want all of us to really gain a lot of knowledge and grow throughout this industry as we progress. And this is a chance for us with the podcast to do that. So if you take 5 seconds and share this on your Facebook or wherever it is, or nudge a friend, I will buy you a beer and I'll definitely say thank you. So I'll leave it there. Thank you again, Tomasz, and I'll be back next week with Michael Wortman. Rock on.